I was asked to talk about, we've been slagging on about the food industry, how awful they are. I thought I should give you a good news story, something that's been successful. It branded one of the most successful nutrition policies since the Second World War, and it happened in the UK and it spread out worldwide. And I just want to give you a very brief and very quick overview of that, and then go on to how we could do the same for sugar and get the UK food industry to lead the same programme. But I would say now, we need an independent nutritional agency to run this, and the responsibility deal is a dead duck in the water. Now, the point about blood pressure is that it's throughout the range. Remember, it's the biggest cause of death in the world. The risk is throughout the range. That's the same for cholesterol, it's the same for fasting blood sugar, and it's the same for hemoglobin A1C. The idea there's some people out there who are at risk, and we're all happy, like we had a question there, I think, about that, is rubbish. People with a systolic of 115 are at risk from their blood pressure, and that's 80% of people in this room. So we need to do something about the population blood pressure, as well as treat those with high blood pressure. And salt is the major factor that puts our blood pressure. Why do we eat it? Well, like sugar, it's not a normal part of our diet. Mammals don't eat salt, they don't eat added sugar. It was a magic property of preserving food. So it's only been used for 5,000 years, a bit longer than sugar actually. And of course, it now is unnecessary. We have much better preservatives. We don't need salt in our food. But the food industry is adding it all. The evidence about salt and blood pressure is overwhelming. Look at all the different types of evidence. We don't have anything like this for sugar, fat, fruit and vegetables, or any other type of evidence that contains all this amount. So no question that salt puts up blood pressure. We're all eating far too much of it, 9 to 12 grams. Remember, our evolutionary intake is less than half a gram. And the question now is how to reduce salt. If you take a country, which is now going on worldwide, how are you going to do it? Well, it depends where the salt comes from. If it's added by the food industry, then you need to get a gradual reduction. You've heard how to do that from Jack Winkler. But if it's all added by the consumer, then you need a much more difficult campaign of persuading the public to use less salt in their cooking, less pickles and all that type of thing. And this is very easy to do. And just as Jack said, the beauty of it is you slowly reduce the salt across the board in all the products. Nobody knows it's gone on. Most people in this room won't be aware that all the things they buy in the supermarkets have come down in salt. Go on eating the same food, your salt intake's fallen, and blood pressure has fallen, and stroke and heart attack deaths fall. This was the plan we had. Salt intake was 9.5, the target was to get to 6. Notice a 40% reduction is the plan. That's exactly what we want to get for sugar, and we think it's practical for sugar. The way it was done, and we had an independent agency setting this up, and we discussed with them and worked them very carefully, was to set targets for each food group. There were 85 categories of food. We'd set a target for 4 years ahead the industry had to achieve, and that was not too difficult a target to hit. After 2 years, we meet up again with them, we set a target for 2 years ahead of that, and then you get this incremental reformulation. So after 10 years, you've made very substantial reductions, and yet to the food industry it doesn't seem to be very great at the time. And of course, people's tastes adjust. Nobody realises that all this salt has been taken out. And the importance of this, and this is where the responsibility deal falls down in its calorie pledge, we need a level playing field. We want every company to do the same, and we need to monitor them, as the Food Standards Agency do. They produce lists of who was doing what. We could find out and go to them and say, you're not playing the game. And that is how a voluntary system has to work. We'd much rather have a regulatory system, but we have, as you heard from Luciana Bowe, governments or political parties who are not prepared to tackle the food industry, disappointingly. And we may have to go to other countries that are more further forward in public health, because we're a global organisation. The reason the voluntary system works is the carrot and stick approach, that you hit them with a stick, a donkey, and you give it a carrot, and that's what we've done with the food industry. And we know we're winning when you see this sort of recent caricature in the newspapers, that if you get the caricaturist getting the message, you know you've won the argument. Of course, doesn't mean to say the food industry will agree with you. This is the reduction in the salt content of bread that's occurred, about a 25% reduction. Remember, bread is the biggest source of salt in our diet. Other things have been reduced much more. Ready-prepared meals have come down by 40%. Cereals have come down by 30 to 40%. And indeed, every product you buy in the supermarkets come down by an average of about 30%. And the same is happening for food you eat outside the home, but it hasn't been such an effective programme because it was started much later. Salt intake, measured very carefully, has fallen by around 15% by 2008. It will fall further because it's an ongoing programme. And we predict that around 18,000 stroke and heart attack have been prevented, 9,000 of which are fatal. Now, NICE, the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, looked at this programme and calculated the cost of the campaign, which is about £5 million, and the healthcare saving cost £1.5 billion. So that's £1 spent for £300 gain. There's no other such cost-effective public health policy. It's more effective than cigarettes, and the WHO now recognises that as salt reduction in any country in the world is the most cost-effective public health policy. That's not to say we want to do something about cigarettes, don't misunderstand me, or for sugar. This is the paper we published recently. This is the fall in salt intake that's occurred over the last 7 years. This is the fall in blood pressure that's occurred in the untreated population, corrected. If you've taken out people who are on treatment for obvious reasons, and this is corrected for other factors, most of which went the other way, but you can see there was a fall, significant fall in population blood pressure, a very large amount, and this is the fall in stroke and heart attack deaths. Now, we can't attribute all of that to this, but a large proportion of the fall in deaths from strokes and heart attacks over this period is due to the fall in blood pressure, which is due to the fall in salt intake. Now, sugar is very similar to salt. It is pure, it's white, and according to Robert Lustig, it's deadly, and I partly agree with him. It's certainly not something you want to have. And it makes inedible food palatable, like salt. It's only recently part of the human diet, only in the last 200 years, since the slave trade and very cheap imports of cane sugar. And the beauty is, just like salt, the sensitivity of taste receptors depend on your chronic intake. So if you reduce it slowly across the board in the same way as we did with salt, people won't notice, they'll accept the foods, and we can get it down by really quite large amounts. And of course, salt, as you all know, is hidden in all these foods. It's amazing the amount of salt that is stuffed into products. Now, what we want Jeremy Hunt and other countries in the world, and of course the South America have regulated salt targets, Brazil, Chile and Argentina, and South Africa has regulated the salt targets, a much more effective way of doing things. But what we want is to set targets for sugar reduction for all drinks and foods where sugar has been added with no replacement, and we are asking for a 10% reduction within 1 year from today. And there will be no replacement of that sugar. That's a very important point to remember. We're not saying substitute something in unless it's an unabsorbed fibre or water or air, which will increase the size, not the weight of the product. And we reckon that certainly for soft drinks and probably for most foods, we can get a 40% reduction in 5 years. This in itself will reduce calorie intake by 100 kilocalories. And I showed you this slide before, but just showing how this works. If you get a 40% reduction, you reduce calorie intake by 100 kilocalories. And this could prevent obesity, particularly in lower income households, as I said. But we must provide a level playing field, and the responsibility deal, at least for the calorie pledge, doesn't. They took on the salt reduction work, which is entirely based on the Food Standards Agency, is not part of the responsibility deal, and that has continued, albeit we lost 3 years through Andrew Langsley, and he's responsible for slowing down the salt reduction in the UK, and many thousands of people died as a result of that. We want them slow and unobtrusive reductions, so there's no rejection by the public. The taste receptors adjust. Voluntary policy with strong enforcement and clear and transparent monitoring program, which we don't have under the responsibility deal. It's quite impossible for us to see what is going on with the responsibility deal. And we need continuous media exposure because it's a voluntary policy. Obviously, we'd much rather have a regulatory policy because this works much quicker, right? We can get much bigger reductions. But the problem at the moment is that not having an independent nutritional agency means, and many of you have read the thing about civil servants and minister, the minister comes in, he's in control of the policy, causes absolute chaos to public health. We can't have it every few months a minister change, the civil servants going to Perla, say, we don't know what the new policy is, what happens at the moment. It's absolutely chaotic, believe me. We've been exposed to that, and it's incredibly frustrating from a public health point of view, where we know what we want to do, and it's much better to go back to the Food Standards Agency, which had an independent scientific board, decided policy. That was the policy, it stayed in place until they'd achieved the target. Much better system. Why did we change it? Ask Mr. Andrew Langsley. God only knows. And the food industry needs a level playing field, right? That's very important. In order to get these reductions, they've got to know their rivals are doing the same. So that is an absolutely vital part of it. And indeed, in South Africa, when the food industry was polled about salt reduction, would they prefer a voluntary or regulatory system, 29 out of the 30 said they wanted a regulatory system because they wanted to know the others were doing the same, and then it was much easier for them. And actually the salt targets in South Africa are much quicker than ours because it is a regulatory system, not a voluntary one. And this is the plan that we want. We want a 40% reduction in sugar. We can reformulate fat, and we want to do all these other things as well, because this in itself may not work on its own. We are faced by a real challenge in getting obesity and type 2 diabetes down. And whilst reformulation can play a very important part, and will play a very important part worldwide, we think we need to have other actions which we've listed here. Thank you.